On the 7th of May 2015, around 3.3 million young people like me will have the opportunity to vote in a British general election for the first time. At Rawlins Academy, we interviewed all our local candidates on where to make these decisions for first-time voters. There just seems to be so many issues to look at. Where should we start in trying to make that decision?
I think you start with yourself. What's this election about? Well, how is it going to help me? You take, let's face it, politics is about what you can get out of the system.
First of all, I want all young people to vote, regardless of who they vote for. I think engagement democracy is so important. I guess sometimes we as politicians make politics a bit too complicated, and actually politics is about how people live their lives, people of all ages. So I guess you have to think about what are the issues that I most care about.
Well, I think the first thing to do, and the most important thing to do, is first of all make the decision to vote.
It's basically a long-term journey into not just working out for this election who you should vote for, but basically recognising that it's really important to look at the whole spectrum, as you've said.
In the last election, less than half of 18 to 24-year-olds went to the polls and voted. So we asked the candidates, why should we vote?
Because it affects you, it affects your life. I mean, you know, when you spend money, you want to make sure you get a good deal out of it.
This is how democracy works, and I think particularly the events we're seeing at the moment, you know, the issues in both the Middle East, but also around the world, particularly as women. There are many parts of the world where women still don't have the vote, and women in this country died to get the vote. And I think for us not to vote and take part in democracy is kind of letting them down in a way.
If you want to make a difference, if you want to get what you want, you've got to go out there and get it. And it's the same with voting.
You don't have a say. You know, there's a lot of things wrong in this world. One or two things wrong in this country. It is your future. It's not my future.
Well, I think that it's really, really important to vote. It's one of the ways that we can engage in, you know, trying to make the world a better place, which is why I'm in politics and why I started.
According to new research by YouGov, more than 2 million first-time voters will not vote. We asked our candidates what they're doing to engage first-time voters.
We're doing absolutely loads. So I don't know if you've seen any of our kind of social media presence, but the Greens are really, really big on social media. So we've been all over Twitter and Facebook trying to engage people.
And talk about issues in ways that people find accessible and understandable. So things like buying your own home. So for somebody younger, it might be a bit of a dream at the moment, but actually, how can we say that dream is going to be possible when you're earning and everything else?
So we're actually organising, going around the student halls of residence, because it's largely young people and students that are being lost off this register. We're knocking on doors, finding out who the students are and trying to persuade them to register to vote.
With several different manifestos and policies from all the different parties, it can be confusing for a first-time voter on who to decide. Our next question was, how does a young person decide which issues are more important?
You've got to go with your own conscience to a certain extent, and you've got to go with what you think is right. And it wouldn't. If I start putting out examples, it would sound as if I'm trying to give you ideas.
It depends on the individual concerned. Everyone's different. Everyone's going to have a different outlook.
As I say, it's those which really affect them personally. So, for example, on jobs, on education, those sort of things. But of course, you're in it for the long term, and to that extent, you've got a whole life ahead of you. And look at those longer term issues as well, such as the environment. That really is going to hit us, you know, in the next 10 to 30 years.
When discussing politics with family and friends, I find it difficult to work out who to side with. So we asked candidates, what if you like one party's stance on one thing, but another's on another?
So you've just got to weigh it up in a balance, just look at what all the parties have got to offer and say, this party's got more of what I want than that party, and that's all you can do.
I think you can look at the side of the details, so, you know, we're going to do this with this tax rate or that with that tax rate, but then actually also thinking about some bigger things. And again, I think there'll be a lot of guides in the newspapers, on the radio and on the internet, hopefully giving some information.
Choose parties in terms of you've got only one vote. And I think part of it is not only choose the party on the policies, but also on their overall ethos.
It's happened many times in politics. When politicians get in, they don't stick to what they've said. So we asked candidates, how do you tell who's telling the truth?
I would say the trick is this. Don't just listen to what people say. Listen to what they don't say. Because people get asked a question, they give you a slightly evasive answer. do you believe such and such? And they don't answer yes, and they don't answer no. They waffle in between.
You've got to think, I think, about is one of the decision processes that's done in a number of cases, and you've probably done that in other lessons, is where you get the whiteboard, it's not quite as big as that, draw a line down the middle, and then say pros and cons. What do you like about this party, what do you dislike about that party? Get another whiteboard and do the same thing.
Looking at that kind of what's in it for you, you know, why are you saying that? Looking at the whole context, and then weighing that up against, you know, your own imagination and your own desires for wanting to, you know, for what you want the world to look like.
Next we asked them, do you think we should vote for who will benefit us directly in the near future, or vote for people who will benefit wider society?
I think in the terms of this present crisis, then people are actually looking for quick fixes. Maybe that's not the best, and maybe the sort of long term is going to be the ultimate solution to the crisis that we're in. But as I say, I think really, if you sort of look at their policies and say, what sort of party is this? What sort of people do they represent? What sort of values do they represent? Then I think that'll help you both in the short and the long term.
At the end of the day, I mean, a lot of people will obviously look at their own particular circumstances, or what's likely to happen to the next couple of years. Am I going to university? Am I getting older and likely to use the NHS? You know, it'll be things like that. Do I have a child and they're going to go through the education system? So I can't say definitively, but I would suspect that for a lot of people it's a bit of a blend of both.
I think you should look long term and look at the bigger picture. And again, it comes back to this idea of, you know, having this idea in your head of what you want the world to look like. And don't listen to people when they say it can't be done.
It depends on your own individual circumstances. If you're really, really hard up, I mean, really struggling to make ends meet, then you really would want to vote for the party that will get you out of trouble. I mean, if you're relatively affluent and well off, a few £100s a year makes a relatively little difference. I think it's much easier then to look at the wider issues.
Whether you talk about short-term things or long-term things is another interesting question. I think that too often Britain focuses on the short-term fixes, whereas other countries look at the long-term fixes.
And the most important issue, how would our leaders advise us to vote?
Don't be easily swayed by what people tell you. I mean, about the parties. Yeah. They're there to try and sell you something.
I'd say don't get overawed by it. You know, when you're going to buy a camera or a phone or whatever, you know, you do a little bit of research and you go around and compare prices on the internet or whatever. And it's a bit like that with, you know, with politics. Have a look on the website, have a look quickly at the manifestos, and each of the manifestos will be divided into young people, economy, things like that. Have a quick read through those, compare them and say, okay, right, I'm more comfortable with this party than I am with the other.
Think about yourself, think about who you are, think about what you like, what you don't like, you know, and know yourself in a sense, because if you don't know who you are and what you want the world to be like, then again, you're not going to be able to make a very good decision that suits you either in the short term or the long term.
Simply, many people my age just don't understand how politics works. So we asked them, do you think we should make politics a compulsory subject so everyone actually does understand how it works?
I thought it already was.
It's not compulsory.
Maybe not compulsory, but certainly it ought to be offered. Should it be compulsory? At least a certain amount, up to a point, yes, I think it should be.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know if it's necessarily about having a compulsory hour of politics specifically, because then I think you tend to get into this idea of politics as a subject.
I think so, yeah. I think it's not just politics, but also how society works, how forms work, those sort of things, how to apply for things. All those sort of things ought to be taught at school, certainly. And I think also there ought to be a sort of mock. I mean, some people think, you know, what do they do in that polling station? How do you actually go about it? I would hope that in every school there's a mock-up of a polling station, so people actually go in, pretend as if they're going to vote, and see the process, so that when they do it, it's not scary at all.
So after all that, we finally worked out why it's so important to vote.
And on the 7th of May, if you do one thing, make sure you vote.
All that kindly work out once.